My grandfather built that house with his own hands. He spent 3 summers hauling lumber up a narrow mountain road, cutting timber from downed trees on the property, and fitting every beam into place himself. He never hired a contractor. He never borrowed money. He just built, quietly, patiently, the way men of his generation did things, until the house stood solid against the pines, looking out over a valley that turned gold every autumn and white every winter. He left it to me when he passed 8 years ago. I am not a sentimental person by nature. I don't cry at films. I don't keep birthday cards. But when the attorney handed me the deed and said, "It's yours now," I had to look out the window for a long moment before I could respond. That house was the only place on earth where I had ever felt completely at peace. Some people have churches. I had a pine-covered ridge at 6,000 feet, a wood stove, and my grandfather's handwriting on a small plaque above the door. "Rest here. You earned it." I used the house as a retreat. 4 or 5 times a year, I would load my truck and drive the 2 hours up the mountain, spend a week cutting wood and reading and sleeping 10 hours a night, and come back to ordinary life feeling like a human being again. The neighbors in the small valley community below the ridge were decent people. I knew most of them by first name. We waved when we passed each other on the gravel road. Nobody bothered anybody. That changed when the Homeowners Association was formed. I should say up front, I did not join. The HOA organized itself among the newer residents in the valley about 4 years ago. The people who started it had moved up from the city and brought certain habits with them. The belief, primarily, that common spaces required governance, that rules produced harmony, and that anyone who preferred to be left alone was probably hiding something objectionable. The president of the HOA was a man named Gerald. I knew him only by reputation, organized, energetic, absolutely convinced of his own judgment. He had a habit of distributing printed newsletters to every property in the area, whether or not you were a member. I received them on request, read the first 2 out of curiosity, and placed them in the recycling bin. My property sat above the valley, accessible only by the gravel road that cut through the lower community. Technically, the road crossed a small strip of land that was considered a shared easement, a long-standing arrangement that predated the HOA by decades. My grandfather had negotiated this easement personally, and it was recorded in the county deed records. I had full legal access. No one had ever questioned it. Until they did. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was printed on HOA letterhead, an actual letterhead, which I found remarkable. And it informed me that my use patterns of the shared road were inconsistent with community standards, and that I should consider attending the next monthly meeting to discuss. I did not attend. A second letter arrived 3 weeks later, this one noting that my property had been identified as a potential compliance concern regarding certain unspecified aesthetic guidelines. I wrote back a single sentence. My property is not subject to HOA guidelines, as I am not a member and never agreed to your covenants. I received no reply. The third letter contained a dollar amount. They claimed I owed a road maintenance assessment of $420, retroactively applied for the past 2 years. I called an attorney. She confirmed what I already suspected. They had no authority over my property, no mechanism to collect assessments from non-members, and no legal basis for any of their claims. She sent them a letter on my behalf. The letters from Gerald stopped. I assumed the matter was concluded. I arrived at my grandfather's house on a Thursday afternoon in October. It was one of those autumn days that feels almost embarrassingly beautiful. The aspens had gone full gold, the sky was as a hard clean blue, and the air smelled of pine resin and approaching cold. I was looking forward to a full week of nothing. No phone calls, no deadlines, no other human beings. I had groceries for 8 days and 3 new books I had been saving. I turned off the gravel road onto my private drive, a 1/4-mile track through the trees that led to the house, and noticed immediately that something was wrong. There were tire tracks in the soft earth that were not mine, fresh ones, and there was a vehicle parked beside the house that I had never seen before, a silver SUV with a university parking permit hanging from the mirror. I parked, I sat in my truck for a moment, then I got out and walked to the front door. It was unlocked. My front door, which I distinctly remembered locking, was standing slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Inside, someone had been living, not visiting, living. There were dishes in the drying rack, a blanket folded on the couch that was not mine, a half-empty coffee mug on the kitchen table, still warm, a jacket hanging on the hook by the door. On the kitchen counter, arranged with an odd domesticity that made my skin go cold, were groceries, cereal, coffee, a block of cheese, an apple. I stood in my grandfather's kitchen and looked at someone else's groceries on my grandfather's counter and felt something shift in me, a slow, clarifying anger, the kind that does not raise your voice but drops it. I heard footsteps from the back bedroom. Gerald walked out. I recognized him from a community newsletter photograph, mid-50s, neatly dressed even now, a certain confidence in his posture that faltered considerably the moment he saw me standing in the kitchen. He stopped. We looked at each other. "I can explain," he said. "You're in my house." I said, "I know how this looks." "You're in my house," I said again, "with your things and your food, on a property you have no permission to be on." He began talking quickly. He had a key. He didn't explain how he had gotten a key, and I did not ask, because I could see from his expression that whatever explanation he offered would be unsatisfactory. He said something about the house being empty most of the time. He said something about the community having a right to oversee properties that were underutilized. He said that he had intended to reach out. I let him finish. Then I said, "You need to gather your belongings." He gathered them. I watched him carry boxes and bags to his silver SUV. He made 3 trips. The whole time, he spoke in a tone that oscillated between apology and justification, as though he hadn't quite decided which posture served him better. I said nothing. I walked behind him and watched. When the last bag was in the SUV, he stood by the driver's door and looked at me with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost contrite. "I hope we can resolve this privately," he said. "Drive out," I said. He drove out. I then spent approximately 45 minutes on my phone. I called my attorney. I explained what I had found. She told me to document everything, the tracks, the items, the current state of the house. I photographed every room. I photographed the tire tracks. I photographed his groceries before I removed them. I went through the house carefully, noting what had been used, what had been moved, what was different from how I had left it. Then I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line and reported an unauthorized occupancy of my property. The dispatcher took my information and said a deputy could come out the following morning. I said that was fine. Then I got back in my truck and drove it to the bottom of my private drive, where a narrow gap between 2 large pine trees marked the entrance. I had, some years ago, installed 2 heavy timber posts at this entrance, with the intention of eventually hanging a gate. The gate had never materialized. I had simply never gotten around to it, but the posts were solid and the hardware was there. I had a tow chain in my truck. I had a heavy gauge padlock in the toolbox, and I had, stored against one of the posts, a section of steel cable I had bought for a different project and never used. I spent about 20 minutes rigging a secure closure between the 2 posts, anchored through the existing gate hardware, sealed with the padlock. The road in was now the road not out, not without my key. Gerald's silver SUV was still on my property. He knocked on the door about 10 minutes later. I opened it. "The road is blocked," he said. "Yes," I said. "I need to leave." "You're welcome to call someone," I said. "You're also welcomed to wait for the sheriff's deputy, who is coming tomorrow morning." He stared at me. I should say, I was not preventing his departure out of any impulse toward cruelty. I was preventing it because I had a trespasser on my property, a sheriff's report pending, and a reasonable interest in making sure that the person who had been occupying my house without permission was present when law enforcement arrived to document the situation. Gerald leaving quietly before the deputy came would have served Gerald and inconvenienced me. I saw no reason to arrange events to Gerald's advantage. In his SUV, I slept very well inside the house. The deputy arrived at 9:15 the following morning. She was efficient and professional. She took statements from both of us. She photographed Gerald's belongings in his vehicle, my documentation of the house, and the overall property. She noted that unauthorized occupancy of a residence was a serious matter and that the county attorney's office would be in contact. Gerald, by this point, had shifted entirely to the apology posture. He said he had made an error in judgment. He said he had believed. He was careful about how he worded this, that the property was available. He said he had meant no harm. The deputy listened without expression. She then explained to Gerald that intentions were separate from actions and that he should expect further communication from the county. She unlocked the gate herself as part of her official duties. Gerald drove down the mountain without looking at me. In the months that followed, several things happened in an orderly sequence. The county attorney's office did contact Gerald. He hired a lawyer of his own. There were conversations between lawyers, then agreements, then a formally executed document in which Gerald acknowledged the unauthorized occupancy of my property and agreed to certain terms, including a binding understanding that neither he nor the HOA had any authority, claim, or basis for future contact regarding my property. The HOA newsletter stopped appearing in my mailbox. The road assessment demand was permanently withdrawn. My attorney, who billed reasonably and had excellent judgment, described the outcome as entirely satisfactory. I agreed with her assessment. I am back at the house now as I write this. The aspens are bare. It is February, and everything is snow and silence, and the occasional sound of wind in the upper pines. The woodstuff is going. My grandfather's plaque is still above the door. Rest here, you earned it. The gate is installed now. Properly, with cedar timber and black iron hardware, the way my grandfather would have done it. It is solid and square, and it fits the gap between two posts exactly. I have one key, on my keyring, next to my truck key. Some things are simple. A man builds a house. He leaves it to someone he loves. That person locks the door when he leaves and expects it to still be locked when he returns. That is not a complicated arrangement. It just needs, occasionally, to be enforced.